You're listening to Designing the Revolution. This is chapter 23, The Sociology of Revolution, part 1. Right, so I'm not quite sure how long this chapter is going to take, so I'm going to split it into two bits, partially, dare I say, because I'm going to my birthday party in about 35 minutes. So let's see how we get on. All right. So we're about to embark on this joint journey, as it were, into this project of regime change as we look forward, as you might say, to the collapse of the carbon regime. And this is a specific project, in the 2020s, maybe in the 2030s, maybe sooner than we think, who knows, but it's coming. And in the last chapter, I tried to sort of cheer you up a bit because you're probably feeling a bit nervous about it and say, look, this sort of thing happens all the time. Regimes collapse. This is why they collapse. They have contradictions. They get into irrational herding behaviour. They get into debt. They get into sort of collective stupidity cycles and all the rest of it. And you can see this, in spades at the present moment with the neoliberal regime. So in this chapter, in these two parts of this chapter, what I want to do is, again, prepare the ground a little bit by looking at what I think is a crucial literature, which is the sociology of revolution, or historical sociology. So if you're not that familiar with this sort of literature, basically it's different to history in the sense that what historical sociology does is it looks at historical episodes, but it tries to look more systematically at patterns of causality. This causes this. And, you look at another period 20 years later, you can see the same patterns of causality and patterns of narratives that appear. And it's useful, of course, because then it enables you to give predictions of patterns in the present day and in the future. Not absolutely, of course, this is not, car engines. But again, there's a nuance here, which is it gives you a sense of how things work out. And the other thing about this is that historical sociology, in so much as it tries to be social scientific, tends to undermine the ideologies of the present moment. And we've had this ideology for a good 200 years now, which is there's a left and there's a right. And all the different pluralities of social conditions get sort of slotted into these two camps. Now, I'm not, as usual, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm not saying the left-right division doesn't have some, analytical usefulness. Obviously it does. But there's a lot more sort of games out there, as you might say, orientations, which we need to attend to. And in some ways, these are more important, or at least broaden our understanding of historical processes and how revolutionary and uprising processes happen. And it gives us arguably, this is what I hope, it gives us a greater analytical intelligence in actually going, okay, how are we going to proactively create this? What's the agenda? What are we focusing on? What are the tendencies we can learn from history? So one of the key things that the sociology of revolution shows, or historical sociology shows, in my interpretation at least, is that materialist reductionism is a very vulgar and outdated way of looking at history and historical sociology. So sorry about the long words, but materialist reductionism means that there's stuff, and the stuff relates to each other in a mechanical way, and it deterministically produces certain outcomes. Certain outcomes are inevitable in some sort of broad, overriding metaphysical way. So we sort of touched on this idea of vulgar Marxism, which is, the revolution is definitely going to come, contradictions in capitalism. It's like top level, broad analysis. And historical sociology is saying no, right? If you look, at if we look at the actual weeds, as it were, of history, we see ecologies of connection. So not materialist reductionism, ecologies of connection. In other words, there's loads of different groups, there's loads of interactions, it's not deterministic, it's complex, and yes, there's variations on general themes, but we need to have a more sophisticated analysis. Yes, there's the left and the right, but there's other fractures in society, there's other mass psychologies, traditions, confrontations, and these change throughout history in different historical periods. And there's different fractures in society come to the fore. So, for instance, before the French Revolution, there wasn't a left or a right. The left and right hasn't been with us forever. It's not an ahistorical category. It's something that emerged after the French Revolution, and obviously has been quite dominant according to the present political regime, how it likes to describe itself. Okay, so I want to sort of draw out a little complication here, which is going to be quite important when we start designing our strategy. And that is that revolutions, the profound sort of challenging point I want to make is the relationship between revolutions and conservatism. So, the average person watching these episodes will be going, conservatism bad, revolution radical and good, right? No, it's like in the historical record, conservatism defined as wanting social conditions to stay the same has arguably been as much as a motivator to engage in uprising and revolutions as the desire to change everything, which is quite a transgressive idea, right? Progressive orthodoxy, as you might say. So let me give you an example. In the early 19th century, let's say take the 1830 revolution in France, or even the 1848 revolution in France, what you see there is two groups in an alliance of convenience, both of which are fighting against the autocratic reactionary regime of emperors and all this sort of business. And the two groups are, broadly speaking, the artisan class. Now, the artisan class, the guild class, they don't want capitalism. What they want is to keep things the same, price fixing, apprentice systems, very little role for the free market. And the reason for that is they want to keep things the same because they're sort of doing okay, and they're threatened by all this modernity business and, industrial capitalism. But of course they hate the autocrats because they're always, taxing them and all the rest of it. And then they're in alliance with what you might call the prototypical capitalist class, which is just emerging at this time, saying we want free trade, we want open economy, we want industrialization, we want to, destroy communities if needs be in this great, forward striding of materialistic history, and everyone's going to be better off, except they're not really, because the rich are going to take all the money and there's going to be these massive losers, as it were, as always is in rapid economic change. So you can see these two groups have got very different agendas. One is radical, forward-looking, one is conservative, backward-looking, and you can argue which one is left and which one is right. The whole thing gets a little bit confused. But what the point is here is this makes the whole situation a lot more complex, doesn't it? It's like, okay, so you're trying to build, bringing people together who, according to certain ideologies, have very little in common, except they do, because they're fighting against this common enemy, as you might say. So you can see this happening at the present moment, right? Again, these patterns of history repeat themselves. So over the last 30, 40 years, for the sake of argument, you have this what's sometimes called is the old Fordist system, mass trade unions, mass industrialisation, not much international trade, well-paid workers relative to the rest of the population, not too much social inequality, but these big blocks, big political parties, big industries, big trade unions and what have you. So people join these things. And then you've got this neoliberal project coming in the late 1970s, 1980s, which is saying, no, we're going to break all this up. We want this post-Fordist orientation, not great big factories with making, 1 million cars a day. We've got, buying the parts in from China, and we've got this international economy, and, we're exporting jobs, and we're undermining the Western working class. And, but it's the forward striding of deterministic history. You can see the same rationales that were happening in the early 19th century. So the upshot of this is this notion of there isn't an objective left and right, which as a grid goes on to different social groups in society. That group is going to be left wing, that group's going to be right wing. It's a lot more complex than that. That group's going to be part of the revolution, that group isn't. No, there's an intrinsic fluidity, and and when you're appealing to these groups, you're using notions that could be appropriated by the left or the right. So you think about concepts such as decency, hard work, community. These are words and values which it's not particularly clear whether they're left-wing values or right-wing values. But what we do know is, for much of the population, arguably the majority of the population, these are the three main values: decency, hard work, community responsibility. So in other words, like, a revolutionary project is up for grabs historically. It depends on what the revolutionary strategy is. Do you go, we're not going to talk to that group because we don't like them? Or are you going to go, oh no, let's go and talk to them. Let's try and, appropriate their values, as you might say, for this collective project. So examples about how this can go, just quickly, is the artisan class in the 1920s, late 1920s, 1930s, the lower middle class, in other words, of Germany, they historically have been quite progressive. They might support liberalism or even socialism, but because of the Nazi strategy, the Nazi project basically appropriated support from the lower middle class because they were threatened by industrial capitalism, and they thought the Nazis were going to, bring them back to true German values. Let's put it like that. Obviously, they made something of a mistake. Let's put it like that. But you can see how it wasn't immediately obvious which way these people were going to jump. And then paradoxically, in Russia in the late 19th century, the peasants, they all loved the Tsar. They were traditionalists. They were conservative, with a small c. But they moved to the radical left, like the far left, by 1905, 1914, because the revolutionary strategy went out and converted, as you might say, this class to the revolutionary cause, saying the Tsar's never going to look out after you, he's going to continue to oppress you, the whole capitalist situation is crap, and you want to become left revolutionaries. And so they did. So again, there's not, this is many, many examples where historical determinism doesn't make any sense. There's this agency, there's this fluidity in the social space. And obviously this is an inconvenient truth, as it were, to all the left defeatists, all these determinists who are going, there's no way, people are going to rise up against neoliberalism because it appeals to people's, self-interest and everyone's selfish. It's very convenient. It just means you don't have to do anything and just sit there in your relative privilege while, people that are having a really hard time aren't organised properly. So what I want to do is just look fairly quickly, and we'll look at this more, at this notion of left popularism, which has grown out of this historical sociology, which is saying what we can do is construct the people. So this is going to be a key concept. I'm not personally that mad about it because construction is a bit of a mechanical sort of phrase. I'd rather use a more organic word, but leaving that aside, the construction of the people, what this key concept means is it builds upon this idea that you've got this social fluidity, these different groups. They could be on the left, they could be on the right, they could be reactionary, they could be revolutionary. It all depends on the agency of the revolutionary project. In other words, how you appropriate them, how you approach them, how you engage with them. Do you do you say, oh, we're not going to talk to that group and such like. So part of the strategy here, and we'll talk about this a lot more, is about understanding those values of those groups and supporting those values and making the argument, as it were, that those values lead to a left-wing revolutionary proposition, decency, hard work, community. The whole system is against this, so come with us and we're going to overthrow that system. So the other aspect of this left populist strategy, this construction of the people, is to engage in contestation, passion, emotion, confrontation, transgression. And this has echoes, of course, of what we've been saying in the action chapters on civil disobedience and running campaigns. Is what animates people, what creates fluidity, is this atmosphere of debate and upset, as it were, in the social space. People talking about it. Are they good guys? Are they bad guys? And you have this possibility to build this new alliance, this new people, this new majority that's going to engage in structural political change. That's the theory. And you can see that this theory is based upon this historical sociology saying there aren't set left-wing forces and set right-wing forces. You know, obviously, again, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, has a certain logic to it, but it's massively complicated by the historical record, and it's massively complicated in modern complex society where people don't have fixed allegiances. If anything, their main allegiance is to be opposed to the political class, as we're increasingly aware that the division is between the political class and the popularist mass, as you might say, the popularist like ecology of different groups who haven't been able to connect together because of cultural blocks. But these cultural blocks can be overcome through sophisticated strategies of bringing people together, engaging in sociability and such like. So the point here is this sociology of revolution, this historical sociology of political change, is a lot more optimistic, as you might say, about how political change works, because the implicit assumption of the neoliberal left defeatist paradigm is there's no such thing as history, right? The end of history. It assumes that things are set. You know, you can't bring down the government in twos. This is just ridiculous. Nothing really happens. We're waiting for things outside our control to happen. And then, you know, if we're lucky, we have some agencies. No. It's like there's massive amounts of agency if people like look objectively, as you might say, at the historical record, and you can see how people in history over and over again, through their passion, dedication and intelligence, basically overcome the powers that are supposedly almighty and indestructible. So the last few comments on this slightly short chapter is as follows, which is there's a little bit of a paradox here, because, or complication anyway, because we have been saying on the one side that there is some determinism here, in the sense that the state, the carbon state, will collapse because of objective, exponentially increasing contradictions, partially social inequality, but more objectively the destruction of the ecosphere and what have you. So on the one hand, we know that this is coming. We know that the elites are completely clueless on this. And the reason for it is because, as with all degenerating elites, they only talk to themselves. They're not going to come and interview me. And if they want to interview me, you know, they're going to want to talk about my farm or something. They're not going to want to entertain the notion that the system's on its last legs and that they need to exit and all the rest of it. In other words, this phenomenon of hypernormality some people use, which is everything's fine. You know, the official situation is we're going to have growth. No, we didn't get it this year. We're going to have it next year. No, you know, we haven't had it for a decade, but the next decade, you know, this continual pretense dynamic, and everyone knows it's bullshit. This is what hypernormality is. Everything looks normal, but underneath the surface, everyone knows it's bollocks. And this phrase, refers to the Soviet Union before 1989. All the journalists talk to each other, all the elites around the world talk to each other. There's this notion of the inevitable continuation of the Soviet Union. It's going to be there for generations, and out of nowhere it collapses. Well, why was that? Because no one was actually asking or analysing how totally fucked off the average Soviet citizen was. In actual fact, it was inevitably always going to collapse because, the objectivity of the economy was collapsing, and you had this fiscal crisis of the state, as they call it. All right, and then once this system collapses of its own accord, as much as anything, or at least it can be proactively pushed, as we're going to be discussing a lot, is you've got this fluidity, you've got material fluidity, who gets what power, who gets what property, who gets what stuff, what happens to the rich, who has that material power. And then you have this cultural fluidity. Who are we? What are our belief systems? Do we still want Christianity? Do we want, some other sort of religious sort of orientation, ideological orientation? Everything's up for grabs, which provides this enormous agency for the revolutionary vanguard, the revolutionary strategy, as it were. And that's what we're talking about. And what we see, just referring back to this pessimism business, is what we see in situations like Greece with Syriza and Podemos is this loss of nerve, that people come into power, and surprised that they come into power, and then they don't take full advantage of its revolutionary potential because they've got this cultural lag of left defeatism, that they can't actually go against Europe, they can't actually go against the international system because, the country is going to get poorer and people won't put up with that. But what we know from the historical record is people can and do and come through it, because people don't like to be pushed around by the rich or some big international system. So obviously there's no guarantee. But you see this if you look at the history of the Syriza episode, is this loss of nerve, and they basically succumb to the EU placing lots of debt arrangements on them when they could have just said, go away, we're going to do it ourselves. Okay, so this is connects with this research by Erica Chenoweth, how civil resistance works, which I've referred to, on several occasions, probably one of the most important social scientific studies of the last generation. And although it's ostensibly around why violence doesn't work, and we're talking about this in part 2, the deeper understanding that this book promotes is this agency that the activists have, that the revolutionaries have, in terms of designing a strategy and creating an organisational system, a disciplined organisational system that can create new herding dynamics, right? Not the herding dynamics of let's stay in the system even though we know it's fucked, but new herding dynamics, which is, hey, we're going to take control and we're going to create this new society, and everyone gets sucked into this enthusiasm, which, might be a bit frothy and all the rest of it, but it's substantially real in the sense that it can take control quickly, and it can appropriate these notions, these perennial notions that could be left or could be right, notions of honour, decency, hard work, community, and such like. And then you get this political renewal dynamic and bringing sociability into the political space and humanising it. And such like. So that's the promise, right? And I'm not saying for a minute this is, a done deal, okay? What we're going to design over the next few chapters is how we can maximise the probability of this happening, knowing we've got this enormous opportunity coming down the road, because this regime is not going to last. Okay, so dare I say it, I've got to go to my birthday party. Sociability rules. Okay, and I'll come back with part 2 and look at other learnings from the historical sociology. Thanks very much.